Hi, welcome to Language in Film, where we take a closer look at how language is used creatively in cinema. HBO's Deadwood burned bright, achieving critical acclaim before being abruptly canceled after only 3 seasons. Deadwood features some of the best writing you'll ever have the pleasure to experience on screen.
Could you have been born, Richardson, and not egg-hatched as I've always assumed?
The dialogue is so dense and multi-layered that it's the sort of thing you'd be asked to unpack in English class were it not for the extremely high ratio of F-bombs per sentence. How did David Milch, the show's creator, produce such great lines? Not once or twice, but consistently in almost every scene. His writing process was unique, and seeing how David Milch wrote Deadwood is a wonderful example of how a writer must persevere under a conviction that what will eventually materialize will be something of value. And equally important to this belief is an understanding that large parts of this raw material will be altered, changed, or downright thrown out. I think a lot of aspiring writers are often diverted from writing because when they sit down to do it, they have this idea that it must flow out of them as a fully formed final product or it's worthless. And so they're plagued by writer's block, unable to even begin. If they do get some words out, there's the tendency to be overly critical of them to the point of being discouraged from seeing it through to the end. But the writing process is really about what happens after it comes out of you. It's an evolution where the first draft is only an initial and arguably minor step in the creation of the art itself. Milch's original inspiration for the most obscenity-laden show of all time came from an unexpected source, the New Testament. Milch's original conception was for a show that centered around the Apostle Paul, who lived in a chaotic time under the rule of a sadistic emperor, whose life after his sudden vision of Christ on the road to Damascus and subsequent conversion revolved around attempting to forge a new society under the auspices of the cross. Milch was interested in how individuals come together to form societies and institutions out of a lawless environment.
I'm declaring myself conductor of this meeting as I have the bribe sheet.
But due to bad timing, or rather good timing, you could argue, he discovered after pitching his show to HBO that they already had a show centered around ancient Rome. So Milch had to adapt his vision. He kept the themes he wanted to explore regarding society and its symbols and characters, trying to build order out of chaos. He just needed another suitable time and place. And that's when he stumbled on Deadwood and the mythic American West. So Nero becomes America. Apostles become gunslingers. And the cross that drew them transformed into the promise of gold. Milch's ideas and conceptions of the characters continued to evolve even as the show was being produced. Deadwood would have been a very different show if Milch was the type of writer who refused to adapt to the truth of his characters. It's really quite astonishing just how much of this show was essentially written on the fly. The part of Al Swearingen, for example, was originally conceived of with the actor Ed O'Neill in mind. But then Ian McShane came in, recalled Milch, and showed me who Swearingen was.
Shows good thinking and initiative.
Trixie was originally going to be killed off early in the show, but after seeing actress Paula Malcolmson in the role, Milch rushed to make heavy rewrites so she would live. Similarly, the young Norwegian girl around which much of the early plot is set in season 1 was initially due to be killed by Swearingen, but Milch couldn't do it. The result is that Swearingen couldn't do it either. Not because he isn't a psychopath, but because in some ineffable way, to do so would rub against the grain of his nature. And from these revised decisions were born remarkable scenes where the acting is improv, where the actors themselves, like the characters, are unsure of how things exactly will play out. In his recent memoir, Life's Work, Milch writes, "I can trust myself to know how a character will behave in a particular situation, but I don't know the lived facts of his past experience until I watch that behavior, and then, in a constructive relationship with an actor, infer what the character's past must have been." This quote is fascinating to me because it really goes against not only common sense, but most best-selling books on screenwriting, which usually recommend uncovering a character's core wound from their past, which drives their present-day behavior. This encapsulates the reality of how people live their lives, after all. But fiction is not reality, and this is a good example of how that can be. For Milch, there's an indelible part or truth of a fictional character that is somehow outside of the flow of time and chronological experience. How uncanny is this? Did the executives who funded the most expensive show for its time realize that scenes were being written sometimes only hours before they were shot? That Milch wrote the show less like a professional screenwriter and more like a mad prophet, channeling divine providence? I find that I function most effectively when I sort of disembody myself. I lie there on the floor and I talk, and the words come up on the screen, and then I fix the words. Characters reflect a divine truth that Milch seeks to uncover by tapping into their nature, their desires, their fears, their motivations. His job is not to create them so much as to hear them, to be alert and attentive, and to respond appropriately. He will completely rewrite a storyline without hesitation if his characters surprise him and reveal themselves to be different from his original conception. And channeling these inner voices is fundamentally a mystical process for Milch, meaning it's an attempt to establish a direct connection with the divine. The divine will is mentioned repeatedly when Milch describes his writing process. Another quote, "I believe one way God says, 'I too have a hand here,' is in the rhythms and metrics of speech. When a character in Deadwood, or anyone, talks in certain locutions unbeknownst to themselves, they honor a divine presence." So odd as it may seem, God is omnipresent in the lines of Deadwood. And interestingly, Milch's original idea of the Apostle Paul still managed to work its way into the story in the form of the Reverend, played by Ray McKinnon.
So much blood. And on the battlefields of the Brothers' War, I saw more blood than this. And asked then after the purpose, and did not know. And don't know the purpose now. But know now to testify that, not knowing, I believe.
He has seizures as the result of a brain tumor, and these have been suggested as possible sources for heavenly visions in the ancient world, like the kind Paul experienced on the road to Damascus. And of course, in season 1, there's a lot of emphasis placed on this particular quote from Paul.
How firm a foundation for the hillman from the gospel. 1 Corinthians 12.
All right.
If the foot shall say, because I am not the hand, I'm not of the body, is it therefore not of the body?
So the lesson Milch offers us is, be open to the organic unfolding of the writing process. I began working on this video with the idea of writing about the incredible dialogue, but the focus then shifted, and I had to be open to that shifting. I had to adapt, and the more I clung onto my original concept for what this video should be about, Deadwood's excellent dialogue, the more I procrastinated when it came to actually sitting down and writing it. Then I realized that I should really be ready to adapt to the voices I hear and follow where they lead.